there's time for it all. So thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Carla Mae Crookendale and I will be your moderator. Welcome to Building Bridges Between Libraries and Marginalized Arts Groups, a closer look at engaging with women of Mexican ancestry to preserve their work. This session is presented by the Association of College and Research Libraries, or ACRL. And before presentation begins, there are a few quick announcements and housekeeping matters that I would like to mention so that everyone can have an enjoyable learning experience here. So our questions will be welcome throughout the session via chat. We will moderate those, but we will save them till the end. My colleagues Janine Kunst and Elia Trucks will be managing our chat. So we will let them mention those at the end. For our Q&A, we're going to be using a strategy called progressive stacking. This is a technique intended to give marginalized voices a chance to speak, particularly in an environment where there is a dominant group. What this means is if you choose to self-identify as belonging to a marginalized group, especially a marginalized racial or ethnic group, and you'd like to ask a question or make a comment in chat, you can choose to include an asterisk at the start of your chat. As we compile questions and comments throughout the session, we'll prioritize those with an asterisk. You are not required to self-identify, it's just an option. So this session is being recorded, and the link to that recording will be sent to all registrants when it's available. Please be aware that chat transcripts, even private chats, will be captured by Zoom during recorded sessions. All participants will be muted and video cameras are disabled during the presentation for better viewing and listening experience. This session was created through a collaboration between ACRL Arts and the ACRL Women and Gender Studies section. So I'd like to mention the folks from those groups that had a hand in organizing it. So the ACRL Arts section of, the ACRL section of apologies. The arts section of ACRL provides a forum for discussion, learning, and resource sharing between librarians and others working in or interested in the visual and performing arts. So from the arts section, we have Sarah Carter, and you've already met me. For the Women and Gender Studies section of ACRL, it was formed to discuss, promote, and support women's studies, collections, and services in academic and research libraries. So from the Women and Gender Studies section, we have Laura Bonella, Teresa Embre, Janine Kunst, who's helping manage our chat, Pamela Salela, and Elia Trucks also helping to manage our chat today. So now I'd like to briefly turn things over to Laura Bonella, who will announce the winners of the Women and Gender Studies section awards. Laura?
Thanks very much, Carla Mae. So we have two awards. The first award is the WGSS Award for Significant Achievement in Women and Gender Studies Librarianship. This award is given annually to honor a distinguished academic librarian who's made outstanding contributions to women and gender studies through accomplishments and service to the profession. The award recognizes those who have made significant one-time contributions. This year's award recipient is Shanta Smith-Cruz, Associate Dean of Teaching, Learning, and Engagement at New York University. Shanta was selected for this award because of her work with Salsa Soul Sisters, which was founded in 1974 as the first organization for lesbians of color in the United States. She has worked as an archivist, events organizer, speaker, and exhibit curator to preserve their work and make it available to a wider audience. As a result of her efforts, the Salsa Soul Sisters archive is now accessible through the Lesbian Her Story archives, where Shanta has served as a coordinator since 2008, and the work has been featured in major exhibitions, panels, podcasts, and more. Her nominator stated, her archival practice is guided by reciprocity and openness, leading to a meaningful and deeply reflective exchange. She's done so many impressive things with this collection and many others, and I hope you will visit her website at shantasmithcruz.com to read more about them. Congratulations, Shanta, and I would now like to invite her to make a few remarks.
Thanks so much, Laura, and thanks for inviting me to, can everybody hear me? I'm Zooming at the same time with another event, so I want to make sure my permissions work and all that. Laura, yes?
Yes, we hear you.
Okay, good. So thank you for allowing me to say a few words about the Salsa Soul Sisters and my work with their project. I was a partner, or rather a volunteer, with the Lesbian Herstory Archives. And while I was at the City University of New York, and not NYU, so I've actually received this award while at CUNY. So it was sort of bittersweet to receive it and see NYU as an affiliate there, but the work and the labor happened through the City University of New York, so I do want to acknowledge that. And the funding that came from CUNY and their support for faculty development and faculty scholarship really did see this project through. And so what we did was we worked with a community group, the Lesbian Herstory Archives, which I was a member of, and we allowed, we did a call and we said, are there any women of color who want to promote their work and promote their scholarship? And what was really great was the women of salsa were local to New York. And so they actually came to the call, and it was the kind of thing that started 10 years ago in 2010 when I found these women in community. And so we were able to take the community to a larger context, which was bring them into the libraries, into archives, and to promote their work. Since the collection has come to the Lesbian Herstory Archives, they've been exhibited at the New York Historical Society, at Brooklyn College Library, at the Graduate Center Library, at many, at the Ace Hotel. I mean, the list goes on. So we really created a traveling exhibit, as well as currently we're working on some online components. So I'll leave it there just to say that it's really great for women and gender studies to be a focal point for library research, and I hope that more people take advantage of incorporating their community into their scholarship. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and congratulations again. We're happy you could be here with us. And our next award is the WGSS Award for Career Achievement in Women and Gender Studies Librarianship. This award is given annually to honor a distinguished academic librarian who has made outstanding contributions to women and gender studies through accomplishments and service to the profession. This year's award recipient is Emily Drabinski, Critical Pedagogy Librarian at the Graduate Center, City University of New York. Emily was nominated for her numerous publications on gender and sexuality issues in cataloging. She has also published on bringing a radical perspective to the library classroom and providing library services to incarcerated people. She edits the Library Juice Press series, Gender and Sexuality in Information Studies, and she's the co-chair of the Gender and Sexuality in Information Studies Colloquium, a biannual conference that began in 2014. She was named a Library Journal Mover and Shaker in 2014. Her nominator wrote, Drabinski is a longtime advocate for using a gender and queer theory lens to critically analyze systems of knowledge organization, and is also a warrior for critical literacy. Her work is so well known and has been so influential to others that she could easily be called a leading light in women and gender studies librarianship. Congratulations, Emily, and I would now like to invite Emily to make a few remarks.
Thank you so much, Laura, and to the Women and Gender Studies section for this incredible honor. I was so surprised and delighted to receive it. I've put a lot of my effort over the past few years into building infrastructure for women and gender studies in our field, and I'm so pleased to receive this award and hope to use it to extend that work on Library Juice Press Litwin books, as well as the colloquium that we host and hope to host again once the pandemic lifts. So thank you so much, Laura, and thank you for the invitation to join you for this wonderful event.
Thank you, Emily, and thanks for being here. Our awards are sponsored by Duke University Press, who generally provide a $750 check and a plaque for each recipient. And I would like to welcome Evan Watson from Duke University Press to say a few words. Evan?
Hi, thank you, Laura. I'd just like to briefly say congratulations to both of the winners, Emily and Shanta, and thank you for the great work that y'all are doing in the field of women and gender studies. Duke University Press is proud to support the Women and Gender Studies section and sponsor these awards in the small way that we can recognize the important work that y'all are doing. So thank you for inviting me to watch the event today.
Thanks, Evan. We're glad you're here, and thank you again for your sponsorship of the awards. We are so grateful for it. And thank you everyone for being here, and congratulations again to our award recipients. I hope you will all consider nominating some great librarians for next year's awards. And I'll now turn it back to Carla May for our program.
Thanks, Laura, and congrats again to the award winners. And now on to our presentation. This session was originally conceived as a forum to be held at the ALA annual conference that was slated to be in Chicago this past summer. With that in mind, we chose to focus on Chicago's women artists of Mexican ancestry. Libraries and archives have historically ignored or underrepresented artistic contributions from artists of Mexican descent in the United States. Women of color built a foundation for arts and activism on the Lower West Side of Chicago, yet their history remains largely unpreserved, unwritten, and therefore missing from libraries and archives. Archivists and librarians are now working directly with artists to ensure their work is preserved. Our panel showcases experiences from the perspective of a scholar, an artist educator, an artist, and a librarian. Panelists will discuss challenges and triumphs from their perspectives and provide resources for librarians and archives who are interested in Chicago efforts and similar projects across the nation. So here are our panelists: Dr. Hinda Seif, Nicole Marroquin, Diana Solis, and Analú Lopez. So getting things started by providing some context for our discussion, we have Dr. Hinda Seif. Dr. Seif is a professor of women and gender studies at the University of Illinois at Springfield and a member of the faculty board of the University of Illinois Press. After studying undocumented youth activism, she is researching and writing about the important work of women artists of Mexican ancestry in Chicago, the ways they are transforming the city and empowering its communities and residents of color. Recently, she has been working with teaching artist Diana Solis and artist professor Nicole Marroquin on examining and sorting through thousands of photos taken by Solis and writing a book manuscript on her life, photography, and art in Mexican Chicago and beyond. So welcome, Dr. Seif.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen. Let's see. And also thank everybody for being here, as well as especially the people who organized this wonderful panel. We have some great attendance today. So as Carla May said, I wanted to provide some brief perspectives on feminist and decolonial archiving to help frame some of the important work we're going to be hearing about from our other panelists. And I'm drawing heavily today from a special journal issue of Australian Feminist Studies called Archives and New Modes of Feminist Research by Marianne Dever. Let me make sure I've got my timer on. As well as my work with Diana and Nicole on Diana's archives and a wonderful NEH Institute that I participated in last summer at the Smithsonian that included an important visit to the National Museum of the American Indians Cultural Resources Center. So first of all, it's important to remember that safeguarding women and girls' cultural heritage is a human right, according to UNESCO. We tend to think about women and girls' political and educational rights, but they also have cultural rights. And I'm going to abbreviate and talk about women of color, but I'm really talking about women and girls of color today. So questions that this raises are, what is cultural heritage? Who decides what is of value and what should be preserved? In terms of meanings and uses of archiving women of color's cultural heritage, this isn't just an objective issue, but these archives can be intensely meaningful and emotional. to women of color, as well as allies like me who are very passionate about their contents and creating and contributing to them. According to Jen Ashton in the UK, feminist excitement about archives is strongest during moments of struggle when we must creatively respond to oppression. That may sound familiar today. And then there's the idea of the living archive. How can archives support women of color's campaigns and activism today? In terms of librarians, archivists, and archival practice, we all know that librarians and archivists are central to shaping collections and engaging marginalized publics. Using archives was traditionally an elite practice, so how do we democratize them and make them more accessible to women and girls of color? Feminist archiving, many of these discussions have traditionally focused on addressing absences, but new discussions are more focused on knowledge-making practices. For instance, how can women of color take ownership of the archival process, have key roles in related discussions and decision-making? How can librarians and archivists empower women of color to become co-researchers and co-archivists? For example, by identifying, collecting, disseminating, and celebrating their cultural heritages. And how can those who are the subjects of archives, like Diana, who we're going to meet soon, how can they participate in archival decisions like descriptions, digitization, access, and adding their own perspectives and stories? An active role in preserving one's heritage can be very empowering at times when people face violence in other parts of their lives. It's also important to include materials beyond text. Today we're talking about visual arts, but also oral traditions and materials, performance, protest signs, etc. This is all in the context of the rapid digitization of archives and libraries, when we're seeing more and more material at our fingertips, but still need to ask what is being left out, especially when women of color are not leading these digitization efforts. And I'm going to, I'm going to end, if I can find it. Well, I'll end with comments from a feminist archiving manifesto by Ashton. How can archivists and librarians become creative facilitators and storytellers? And this leads us to counter-archival practices, or messing with the archives, as Kashmir has called it, something that you're going to see quite a bit of evidence of from Professor Nicole Marroquin. Librarians can support women and girls of color in socially engaged heritage practice, for instance, by helping them with creative access to and interpretations of archival materials, where people can create contemporary creative work by redeploying archival documents. And finally, another quote from Ashton: experimental facilitation can enhance the role of archivists and librarians, as the archive becomes a catalyst for creative experiences and collaboration. The archivist also becomes an artist and activist. Thank you very much, and I look forward to hearing the other panelists.
Thank you, Dr. Seif. So now we welcome Nicole Marroquin, Associate Professor of Art Education at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Professor Marroquin is a teacher, educator, and an artist whose work explores belonging and spatial justice, and she researches student uprisings in Chicago public schools between 1967 and 74. In 2018, she participated in the Project Development Innovation Lab at the Magnum Foundation, and in 2017, she was in residence at the Chicago Cultural Center, where she worked with youth to create future community, which she exhibited at the Jane Addams Hull House Museum in 2019. She is a Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz Women of Excellence awardee, 3 Arts awardee, an Envisioning Justice artist, and a member of the Just Seeds Artist Collective. So welcome, Professor Marroquin.
Thank you very much. Are you able to hear me? Can I get a thumbs up? Oh, great.
We hear you just fine.
Perfect, great. Thank you very much. I'm gonna share my screen really quick. And then I'm going to start here. So today, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm really thrilled to be here. It isn't often that I have an opportunity to be on a panel with some of my favorite people in the world, and also to talk directly to the people that I've been wanting to talk to like this. So I'm going to introduce myself, talk a little bit about my work, and then talk about some projects that are upcoming. So first of all, I'm an artist, and I'm also a researcher. I'm really interested in thinking about schools as sites of transformation. I spend some time on eBay looking up things that I can't find answers to all the time in books. And this is an example of an image that really excites me. I'm also a licensed K-12 teacher, and I work in a teacher certification program at the School of the Art Institute. And so I'm inspired a lot by these images. But I think a lot about it. So I think through these images, and I'm really interested in doing these other readings of them. Very excited, I'm sure you all are too, by Tina Camp and Cynthia Hartman's work right now. But I'm thinking about how knowledge is produced, where it comes from, whose experiences are represented, and why or why not. And I'm very interested in the rebels, particularly the rebel youth. And this is an image of Ogden Elementary School in 1954 in Chicago during a kindergarten air raid practice. Nice timer. So I do a combination of teaching and art making and research and organizing. And I make some ceramic sculpture, and it's all sort of part of the same thing, just to give you an idea. But in the research that I've done, sometimes I have ended up in formal archives, and one that I'm really, really grateful for is the Rudy Lozano collection at UIC Special Collections. And in reading about Rudy Lozano, this incredible leader in Chicago, labor organizer and community justice worker who was assassinated in 1983, and learning about him, he tells us that we need to actually be involved in the struggles that we're talking about, right? He says, I'm not going to sit in the office and just be managing, right? Managing the justice projects that I'm working on. I'm actually going to be in the street with the workers, right? And so that's part of it too. So when I was in the Lozano collection, I came across many newspaper clippings. There were about 2 boxes of them. And I was looking at them and thinking, God, you know, there were so many Spanish language newspapers, but when you go to look for them outside of his collection, you can't really find them, right? Because they're not always tagged so that, what y'all all know as archivists, but you know, they're not tagged in a way that you can actually just look them up. And so I started gathering the ones that I knew either reported on communities, or actually were bilingual, or Spanish language newspapers. And this is a print I made in 2019. It's kind of huge. It's like 3 feet by 4 feet. But then on the back, there's actually a couple of extra, because I found like 4 more newspapers, because some of them were actually in, you know, non-Latinx communities, and then Latinx people moved there, and then they began reporting it, right? So it's really difficult to look up like Latinx community newspapers in Chicago, also too, because many of them weren't saved. Some of them were also found in the Ruther Labor Library and the Chicago Farm Workers Strike Office collection. So this is sort of how my practice works. I heard about a school where this incredible massive uprising happened, and not only was this unbelievable to me because I hadn't heard of it, but it's 2 blocks from my house, right? So I start Googling, can't find anything anywhere. Neighborhood people know about it. I find pictures on eBay. I make a lot of Xeroxes of them. I take them to the high school where a really brilliant art teacher, Paulina Camacho, teaches. And I say to the students, hey, I've got these fragments of information, like what, you know, let's take them apart and deconstruct it and try to make sense out of it. We're going to find out our questions this way. We're going to try to parse out the narratives this way. And this was actually from the very first collage experiment, just to show you, it's pretty incredible work, right? Like they're kind of leading the way. They've been a part of, like they've been writing the agenda for my research since I started working this way. And you can also see, like, here's a, you know, an image I made that's a poster. It's like completely influenced by their work. These are 2 student collage on the other side. So the things we ask are, you know, how do we access our history and how do we work in the gaps, right? What are artists supposed to be doing in these spaces between what is known? Right. And so this is another example from the same historic image, right? One of them is an image I made in like 2018, and one of them is just from right now. And the one that I'm just made, actually designed and printed in collaboration with Hoofprint Studio, is actually a 2-sided marching poster. And you can see you can march with it. Some people have wheat pasted it. We've made it very affordable, and about $5,000 of the proceeds have gone to bail people out of jail who've been arrested for protesting, which apparently we need to get back to doing again today. So just to continue on, another project I did after establishing some relationships with young people and teachers at Benito Juarez was to start to look at our neighborhood as the archive, right? And members of the community were the texts that we were reading, right? Talking to people, asking people, and also looking at the built environment, right? And so students made, each student made like a 2-inch tall portrait of their house, excuse me. And yeah, we didn't really think it was gonna be that big of a project, but then 172 tiny houses later, and here they are on exhibition at the Hull House Museum. And to see them, all of these homes from the neighborhoods, mostly Pilsen and Back of the Yards and Little Village, next to historic work from the 1930s, made by the hands of immigrants that were working in the Hull House factory, actually served to create a timeline of Latinx ceramics art in the city. And on the other side, this animated GIF is a bunch of their collage, again, using collage as a research tool. They each took pictures of their homes and 5 places they frequent in the community. And we tried to imagine what the community would look like in the future if they were still allowed to remain there, and what they thought was important was taken into account in the redesign, right? So taking what we've got and looking at community assets. And so what I'm trying to do is sort of like think about repositioning expertise, right? If we're not in the archive, where are we? And then another thing I'm interested in is looking at women of color leadership and youth leadership in leadership roles in organizing. And so there was this massive walkout that was organized through Harrison High School, which was a school that was primarily Latinx and African American. And in 1968, there was students began organizing, and I was like finding little bits of information about who was doing what. And I became really excited about learning the history of Sharon Matthews, who started to emerge as one of the leaders at this school, which then, you know, the organizing sort of overtook the whole city, and at least 35,000, and some people have suggested about 60,000 people marched if you counted the middle school, elementaries, and suburban schools. So I used printmaking to find Sharon. I put her on this poster that tried to tell the story because I wanted to know more about her. I wanted somebody to find a way to connect her with me. And actually that poster, you can see her standing in front of it, was on a display at a gallery, and she was standing in front of it, and I knew instantly that it was her. And since then I've been able to have the privilege of interviewing her, which is pretty incredible. I'm really excited to be able to share some of these interviews pretty soon. I'm getting there. But so what's happening right now is, just to zoom up to right now, and as y'all know, the young people at the Lozano Leadership Academy have been protesting at Chicago History Museum, and they were angry about the lack of Latinx history, or the way that Latinx history was represented, not enough and not accurately in this museum. And one thing I wanted to point out is that these posters actually are telling us what the curriculum is that they want. They want curriculum in schools. They want museums to be responsive, to do the work, to get the materials made visible so that people then can create the curriculum, right? It's pretty explicit what it is that they're asking for in the posters. Sorry. And so one thing that's the most, it's become like the most important way of doing this for me is actually talking directly to the people and finding ways to get the stories from these brilliant organizers and artists directly to the people for whom the stakes are the highest, which, you know, in this case is the youth who are growing up thinking, you know, what, do I maybe not have a history? So yeah, there's been a couple of opportunities to bring the stories directly to the young folks. And that brings me to the next discussion, which I'm only going to introduce. I'm not going to get too far into. I have been working mostly over the past year or so, I would say, with the collection of Diana Solis, who is also on this panel. So this is like sort of the very first sort of public presentation of any of her photos was at the College Art Association last year on a panel. And I'm gonna let her talk about her work, but let me also say that looking at 7,000 images that she made, looking at Latinx lesbian movements and organizations and literary conferences in Chicago, in Mexico, and other parts of Latin America has completely changed the way I think about history and my own trajectory, right? The Chicano por mi Raza Digital Memory Project right now, who I'm working with to come up with sort of cataloging, this is, I don't know the vocabulary, y'all do better, but coming up with ways of organizing the metadata and the data and the labels for the files. It's been a complete eye-opener. Hopefully this will be a searchable collection at some point for scholars. The way that she describes the lives of women and girls is unlike anything I've ever seen, particularly Chicago. You know what, I'm just gonna end right here because I don't wanna overlap with anything she's going to say, and I'm about at time. And so thank you very much, everybody. All I would have left to say is just absolute fangirling over everything in this work. And that's about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Marroquin. Well, that was a great lead in to our next panelist, who is artist Diana Solis. So Ms. Solis has worked as a professional photographer, visual artist, and art educator in Chicago. She grew up and lives in the Pilsen neighborhood. After introducing us to a few of her 7,000 photographs from the 1980s and 90s and her more recent artwork, she will discuss her experiences and those of other women artists of Mexican ancestry in Chicago. She will also address joint efforts to document and preserve her life story and work, including significant challenges and how they might be addressed. So welcome, Ms. Solis.
Thank you. Welcome. Thank you for having me on this panel, getting to meet everyone. I'd like to start out with sharing a few slides of my work when I was doing documentary photography, which I had done for a little over 20 years, from 1976 through the late 90s. During which, at that time, during that time, I was able to work on both sides of the border in Latin America, and especially in Mexico from 1983 to 1985. And of course, my relationship with Mexico, as I was born there and traveled there quite frequently as a child and as an adult and studied there. So I'm going to share my screen so we can let me just get to the, get to the images right now. Give me a second. I still have you on screen. I need to, there we go. Okay, is everyone able to see this right now?
Not yet, Diana. Can you click on the share screen button at the bottom of your screen?
I
The
did,
green
but I'll
button?
try again.
Okay.
I did. Let me just open it up again, and here it is. Okay. Okay, I think we have it
There
now.
you go.
Yeah, thank you. So it's difficult to add. Obviously, it was impossible to add everything I've done over those years in this slideshow. So I just chose a few of them. And as someone who started out in photography doing professional photography in 1976, in the early years, what I did was what a lot of photographers did, was to photograph what we knew best, which was our environment, our homes, our families, and our communities. And I was that person, without a doubt, without any exceptions. And in these photographs you'll see on the left is an early self-portrait of myself with a younger brother and sister.
Hi, Diana. Sorry to interrupt, but could you press the little present button at the bottom of your screen so we can see this full screen? We really want to make sure.
Sorry.
Not at all.
Is it the presenter view?
Play from start.
Okay.
There you go.
I did that last time, I think, too. I'm a little nervous. I shouldn't be. So anyway, now you can see this better, right?
Yes.
So anyway, I'm going to move along before I run out of time, but a lot of my early work and my work throughout the entire time has been focused a lot on the neighborhood and the community in which I grew up, and also in Mexico. Of course, in the community, one of the most important things for me has seen it, and for many of us, in terms of our histories, our history has been the disappearance of it, literally because and due to gentrification. Pilsen has had a history of struggles, not just now, but in the past, from the late 50s onward, with issues of gentrification in all of its different manifestations. My work also, because I did work as a photojournalist for dailies and for magazines here in Chicago and Mexico City, I was able to focus on the things that I was really interested in, which were Chicano rights, Latin American workers' rights, gay and lesbian rights, both here in Chicago and in Mexico City, women's lives, immigrant women, and immigrants in general. And this was an image from Gay Pride, Mexico, 1981. Again, following closely the women's movements in Mexico and living there and participating in them. This is a Take Back the Night March in Mexico City in 1987. Nicole Marroquin brought up Rudy Lozano, who was a friend and also someone I had worked with to a certain extent and knew him well. And he was assassinated. These are a couple of the images from that day of his memorial. The one on the left is one of the elders in mourning for Mr. Lozano, for Rudy. And on the right, excuse me, and on the left is a march in commemoration of his life that went down from Little Village all the way to Pilsen. Mother and Daughter Project, Chicago, 1987. As an undergrad student, I was able to get a fellowship from the graduate department in the University of Illinois through the SROP program and received a grant to do an independent project, well, project associated with being a photography major at the school. And I chose to do a project on mothers and daughters and generational and transgenerational their lives. So this was just one of the images from that project. Again, my interest and my life too revolved around a lot of the issues having to do with LGBT, gay pride, and gay youth in the community. And so these images here are just one of many of couple of many of the images I've taken over the years. And on the left is a couple, and on the right, that's at a gay pride rally, the same march. And here is the Latino Youth Gay Group and Friends. They were students from alternative high school in Pilsen. So we'll go on to the next one. One of my other projects, and which also was my senior project upon graduation, which was called Transformations, was about myself and other women who've overcome adversity in their lives, and what about their lives, and seeing some of the things that they had gone through and featuring them. This one was the first firefighter in Illinois, Marta Collazo, and she was part of this project that I had done. Women in sports, women's rugby. Festival de Mujeres 1979, which was a festival started by women, Latino women in the community, in Pilsen community. And it really, that festival was probably the first and perhaps the last of an all women's festival organized by women and for women in a Latino community here in the Midwest. That's the slides for now. Let me get out of here, out of this. Okay, can you see me now? All right. So I think that for most of us as artists, and in particular Latinx artists, women artists, and artists of color, I think it is vital for us to recognize the importance of our own work. And not only within the context of our private or personal lives and or our day-to-day artistic output, but also within a larger context that for its potential to have cultural and historical significance, and how Latinx visual arts makes a deep impact, not only for our communities, but American society and beyond. So too many times I feel that our work is often lost, our histories and our life along with it. Now more than ever, our lives do, because of the pandemic and also because of ongoing gentrification, I wonder about our histories and those histories of many other artists, and how is it that we can have some sort of control and grasp over this, and also some of the challenges, which are, I think, quite a bit. For example, the keeping and preserving of one's work, the physical storage of it, limited monetary resources, or the accessibility to have the proper tools to document the work either through photography or digital scanning. Having adequate space and storage is often out of reach for many artists. And not to mention that because of gentrification, due the constant moving of people being displaced, including artists from one place to another, and in the process, either losing or leaving behind work. And also for ourselves to recognize the importance of, being able to identify that our work has value, and what of that work that we have is archivable, right? And let alone, I didn't know this before, what is primary sources, what are secondary sources, what is important. So for the last 20 years or so, my work was stored in a friend's basement and hadn't seen the light of day in all those years. So it wasn't until I met Professor Nicole Marroquin that we started talking about my past work as a documentary photographer, the themes and subjects, and that spanned, for all those years from mid-70s to the mid-90s. There was a very strong emphasis on Mexican community in Chicago, both including artistic, visual, and performing arts, immigrant and women's lives, Latina feminism, Midwest Chicano and Latino political movements, the feminist and gay movements in the US and in Mexico and in South America. So I worked for a good amount of time as a photojournalist and for local and daily newspapers, Mexican journals, magazines, and also as a fine art photographer. So from those meetings, Nicole and I were sort of up and running with this, and she suggested we look at the files and see in what condition they were in, and if we could literally go in and rescue them. And we were able to get the files out of the basement, and it was, to our surprise, we discovered that the material, because I hadn't looked at it in over 20 years, in negatives, documents, photos, contact sheets, everything for the most part was in an incredible, excellent condition due to the way that I had put them, stored them in metal boxes for the most part, and also preserving and having them in plastic. So after that, Nicole introduced me to Dr. Seif, and the three of us began to work together, finding ways to archive, preserve, and digitize the work, which is, I know, 7,000 plus negatives and all that other material. And I keep finding new things in my back room, which I discovered I had stored away and forgotten about it. In addition to this, Professors Marroquin and Seif are also, as Dr. Seif mentioned before, collaborating on a book about my work. So this is an ongoing project. We've been at it for about 3 years. And it is through this process that we begin to learn about archiving and how to go about looking for the proper archive for the work, how to preserve it. A lot of it has been done by Nicole, and I myself am delving deeper and deeper every day into my archives and looking at things and remembering, because for so many years I had left photography and I became a painter and an illustrator, which is what I do today. But I think life has a way of giving you incredible, great surprises, and it's sort of come full circle for me in the sense that I'm started photographing again. And it sort of is, it's an amazing thing for me, where I thought that I wasn't ever going to do it again because I'm being so busy with the other work. But it's like if I did it yesterday. I picked up the camera, learned how to work my new digital camera, and it was like riding a bike, you know. So it's been a really great experience, and it will continue to be. And for me to be able to do this project with Hinda and Nicole has been amazing, and I'm honored that that they are working with me. So I want to thank you again for. Oh, I just want to mention that one of the people we met through all of this has been Analú, who will be the next speaker from the Newberry Library, who's been incredibly supportive and really important for us, and has helped us in guiding us in terms of all the work and research that we've been doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. Perfect segue to Analú. So finally, we have the librarian perspective. Analú Lopez will discuss challenges she has encountered while working with Indigenous materials at the Newberry Library. Ms. Lopez will discuss the work she does within her community of Little Village, a predominantly working class Mexican, Central American, and South American community. She will also discuss the work she has done in the past with the arts organization 60 Inches from Center, and the importance and challenges of preserving works by women artists of Mexican ancestry and others. Her presentation will touch on issues she encountered as an undergraduate student attending Columbia College, Chicago, when she wanted to find representation of women of Mexican ancestry within archives in Chicago. So welcome, Ms. Lopez.
Thank you. I'm going to turn off my camera just for the presentation because I'm having bandwidth problems at the library. But I want to thank everyone again for the invite to speak today. And, you know, I'm not just saying this because we're good friends, but I'm a huge fan of, you know, Diana's work and what Nicole is doing and everything. So I'm really honored to be speaking with them today. So I'm going to stop my video and share my screen. Okay. Can everyone still hear me?
Yes, we can. Are you looking for the present button on the top right?
Yeah, here you go. Sorry about that. Okay. So I wanted to start off with a land acknowledgement. So today I'm joining everyone from Chicago or Chicago. Let us always remember that we are on Indigenous land. This region we now refer to as Chicago, along with the larger region, has always been home to Indigenous peoples, including the Council of Three Fires, the Potawatomi, Odawa, and Ojibwe, and the Illinois Confederacy. The Peoria, the Kakassia Nations, the Miamia, the Weya, the Ho-Chunk, the Menominee, the Thakiwaki, the Meskwaki and Kickapoo, and the Mascoutin, among many other Indigenous nations. Chicago is also home to one of the largest urban Indigenous communities in the United States, and this land remains an important place for Indigenous peoples. It is our responsibility to acknowledge this historical context and build reciprocal relationships with the tribal nations on whose lands we are situated. Okay, so I'm going to first touch on the work I do professionally within the library, but also a lot of the work I do independently. And the work I do in both, you know, the library and independently is really informed by how I walk through this world as self-identifying Indigenous person from Mexico who grew up in an urban city like Chicago and a community member. What I do has always been guided to bring marginalized histories to the forefront. The approach I take within my work is through an intersectional decolonial lens that includes the community I'm from in Chicago, which is predominantly a Mexican defined community, which is pictured here, which is the entrance to our neighborhood of Little Village or La Villita. So statistically speaking, the vast majority of Chicago Latinos are of Mexican descent. As of the 2010 census, almost over 500,000 residents of the city of Chicago had full or partial Mexican origins. However, the problem with the census, which I know Nicole and I've had a lot of conversations about, is a continued erasure of many other identities. Within this number, there's also Indigenous and Afro-Indigenous people living in Chicago, especially within the neighborhood I reside. In an urban environment like Chicago, the Mexican identity is quite diverse. Just as there are linguistic diversities, there are also ethnic diversities within the Mexican identity. I also want to make it clear though, not everyone that is Mexican identifies as Indigenous, and not everyone that is Mexican is Indigenous. So, you know, it's a complex topic with plenty of scholarship out there, but I think for the purposes of this panel, we can't get into it. It could very well turn into a day-long lecture. But there's a couple resources, right, that talk about this and explore the idea of Mexican Americans and Mexican immigrants and their identity, which I can share with everyone afterwards. So currently, the work I do at the Newberry Library, for those unfamiliar with the Newberry, It's an independent research library focused on the humanities. It was founded in 1887 by a bequest from Walter Newberry, an early non-native white settler in 1830 Chicago. We've been here in this building that you see right here since 1893. The library is free and open to the public, but it's not necessarily a public library. That is, we are funded by our endowment and donations, and we receive no government funding. The Newberry operates basically like a large special collections library and archive. The collection is focused on rare books, manuscripts, and other materials. We also have a total of 11 core collections. The one I work closely with is the American Indian and Indigenous Studies collection, which also has strengths in Latin American material during the colonial occupation of Spain and Mexico. Part of my role at the Newberry as the Indigenous Studies Librarian is to provide reference services related to this collection, which is a very, very vast collection that covers materials on or by Indigenous people across the Americas, coast to coast, pole to pole, from 15th century to present day. I basically help individuals navigate this large collection and connect them with resources for their research. The work I do happens in many ways, but mostly in person, via telephone or email. I also provide instructional sessions and tours to visiting classes and groups. These range from Newberry Associated Consortium groups, community groups, tribal representatives, families, community members, artists. The list is very, very long. Another role I have is to help process to our backlog of Indigenous archival materials for easier access. So over the years, I've had the opportunity to work with many artists interested in using our collections. You know, and very much like scholars, artists do extensive research while creating their works, and I enjoy being able to connect them to resources to see how they reinterpret archival materials. Recently, I collaborated with the artist Luis Sahagún for his retrospective exhibition at the Chicago Cultural Center. I created a research guide to connect resources based on themes of his work within the exhibition, and he made this publicly accessible so individuals can access this online. Another artist, which you see on the right-hand side, that I've collaborated with is Sandy Rodriguez. She's a painter as well, and she creates these beautiful paintings on a mate paper, which is an indigenous form of bark tree. She studies specific plants in depth while reading about them within 16th century books. And I've also made suggestions for us to purchase one of her catalogs, which we added to the collection as well. Delilah Montoya is another artist and a close friend of mine that I've worked with over the years. Her art is noted for its exploration of Chicana identity and for innovative printmaking and photographic processes. She is also noted for her use of mixed media installations and often incorporates iconic religious symbols in her pieces. On the right is her most recent book that I also recommended that we purchase for the collection and include it for the Newberry. In this book, she basically explores cultural and biological forms of hybridity through portraits, and she calls it the contemporary casta portraiture, nuestra calidad. Delilah will also be one of the artists the Newberry collaborates with on an upcoming exhibition titled Vivan las Revoluciones, Forming More Perfect Unions Across the Americas, which will consist of a series of 12 public programs where scholars, writers, artists, and community members will explore the complex histories and ongoing legacies of the age of revolutions across the Americas. Delilah will be part of a tentative panel addressing the art of race within the revolutions in collaboration with the National Museum of Mexican Art, where she will be discussing this Gasta portrait project. Aside from my work at the Newberry, I also write independently, and I had contributed articles to 60 Inches from Center, an online arts publication and archiving initiative that supports art and writing in and about Chicago. I began collaborating with them since 2016 after they invited me to submit an article titled #ArchiveSoWhite. I have also participated in 60's Chicago Archives and Artists Project, an initiative launched with 60 Inches from Center to highlight Chicago archives and special collections that give space to voices on the margins. Led by Chicago-based writers and artists, the project explores archives across the city via online features, a series of public programs, new artist commissions. I also have participated on a series of panels organized by 6D, which you see a couple of the photos to your right of the screen, or left. So the article I published that's with 6D back in 2016, hashtag Archive So White, takes its inspiration from the very hashtag coined by the ex-archivist Jarrett Drake. I believe he's like in the anthropology field right now, but he spawned it from the hashtag Oscars So White, which recognizes that the whiteness and white supremacy laced throughout Hollywood is also laced throughout the US archival field. You can read this article on 6D's website. There are many information professionals that expand upon this topic, such as Stacy Williams, who wrote a great article titled Librarians in the 21st Century. It is becoming impossible to remain neutral. Another favorite, implications of archival labor. If we want respect for our labor, we need to value it more. Talking about the labor librarians and archivists do that oftentimes goes unrecognized. Another librarian I'm a fan of is Sandy Littletree's work. An article titled Embracing Indigenous Knowledge Systems Within LIS sheds light on issues within libraries and archive systems. Most libraries and archives exist within Western knowledge systems. They rarely include non-Western knowledge systems. Seeking out perspectives and questioning the current systems are conversations institutions should be having but also addressing. These current systems, from the libraries and archives and educational ones we are attending, are historically non-inclusive and are rooted in sexism, racism, ableism, and classism, all of which still uphold white supremacist ideologies. The majority of the time, materials use culturally biased metadata that benefit our colonial and Anglo-based organizing systems and paradigms. Problematic and at times very racist subject headings to inaccurate ones make it frustrating for individuals conducting research within our institutions. Other times, if individuals cannot even see themselves reflected within the archive, which I know Nicole and Diana have discussed a little bit. So this continues to happen to this day within Chicago and around the country. To quote Stacy Williams, quote, as underrepresented folks, we have not always had access to the documentation. We have been barred from creating documentation. Even just the act of stopping people from learning how to read or write or making it illegal or punishable stops people from being able to communicate their stories. Memory work as a term respects the way that Black people, and I would include other non-white individuals, have been traditionally locked out of those spaces, end quote. So I remember as an undergrad, back in 2003, while attending Columbia College, we would get assignments to write about artists. The majority of the time, the curriculums to choose from were all white male artists. I would often challenge these whitewashed curriculums in school and ask where all the women, indigenous, artists of color were, and not just the typical tokenized ones, but the many others I knew contributed to the art field. Libraries, archives, and museums back then, and even now, did not go beyond these tokenized artists who oftentimes I would have to do the extra labor to find them. It was during this time back in 2003, I encountered the Chicago Artist Files archive at the Harold Washington Library. The Chicago Artist Files documents over 100 years of Chicago art history with material on over 11,000 artists, art movements, and art organizations. Materials include press clippings, newspaper articles, artist books, photographs, a lot of really cool stuff. I also have some of my material in these files. So I practice photography still, and I donated some of my stuff in there. And I didn't initially donate. I'm not sure who donated some of my work in there for me, but it was interesting to find in there. And on the left, you can see an article that was written about some of the work I've done that explores the intersectionality of indigenous Mexican identities in the urban environment. So I also think we need to remind ourselves, which I know Diana and Nicole also mentioned a little bit about this, that colonial institutions don't always have to be the ones that hold all the knowledge in archives. Community-based approaches to the development of alternative information structures are extremely important. There's some powerful work being done by many grassroots organizations these days, which Nicole mentioned as well. I recently also saw an archive being created online through a local newspaper here in Chicago, Southside Weekly. They're gathering first-person accounts from the Indigenous Black Solidarity Action that happened here in Chicago back in July, which I also participated in, where many Black, Indigenous, people of color, queer, and trans individuals were met with extreme acts of violence by the Chicago Police Department. Southside Weekly mentioned they will be adding to this archive, and many times the communities themselves are and can be their own archive. Other grassroots organizations that you see to your bottom right that I follow include the Chicago Raza Research Consortium, which you can also follow on social media, and was founded in 2019. It's a grassroots effort to map, gather, preserve, and present Mexican, Mexican-American, Chicanx, Latinx, and Raza history in Chicago, which I'm sure Nicole could probably eloquently speak more on it since she's one of the co-founders. I think we need to think outside of the Western knowledge systems and structures. These types of community-led initiatives, amongst many, many others that I haven't discussed, are important resources and guides. So when we speak about building bridges between libraries and marginalized arts groups, we need to ask ourselves what this looks like. I approach opening up the archive or building bridges through what some may call a decolonial lens, but what I also refer to as enhancing representation praxis. That is, being inclusive of marginalized communities while also bringing these voices to the front. We use or hear the term decolonize, but what does it mean within libraries and archives? Within a colonial construct, it is very difficult to completely decolonize, but to me it means individuals being involved in processes that historically were created without us being involved. Actively listening, really listening to the needs of the communities versus assuming and talking. Here I offer two definitions regarding decolonization. Decolonization work also means stepping back from normative expectations regarding knowledge and colonial structures. One also has to not only create these bridges, but sustain them as well. By creating, then sustaining these relationships within communities, it will lead to more possibilities of collaboration, which would lead to inclusion within collections, which in turn means more diverse perspectives within programming. Community outreach is very important to the work I do. Here are some images of groups and community members I've built relationships with over the years, and some I've had the honor of welcoming into the Newberry. On the left, a friend and local community member reached out and asked if I could organize a tour along with a collection of materials on historical and queer Indigenous Mexican representations within the archive. In the middle is an Indigenous Mexican, up to your top right, is an Indigenous Mexican teacher, linguist, and friend that visits the Newberry often. Here he is helping me lead a presentation at the Newberry focused on the Nahuatl language. We also organized a class in Chicago where we teach an introduction to the language. I also integrate a visit to the Newberry to view materials as part of the class. These following images are of an Indigenous school called Anahuacalmecac based in Los Angeles, where the majority of the students, parents, and families are from Mexico, Central and South America, while some are first-generation Mexican. My friend also teaches his Nahuatl language at this school. I was able to visit the school last year and start a relationship with them to connect them to resources, but also have conversations about potentially having the students one day visit the Newberry. So that's the photograph on to your left. Another local school collaboration involved parents of students who attend Morton High School here in Chicago, or I should say a suburb in Chicago. They were predominantly Latino students and parents who visited the Newberry to get a tour and view materials. We hosted them for a total of 3 days, and on this day I had the opportunity to offer the tour in Spanish since the majority of the parents were Spanish speakers, and that's the photograph to your right. Now, the following images were also taken when Instituto Justice and Leadership Academy visited the library last year, and Nicole mentioned them. They were the ones that did the actions in front of the Chicago History Museum. Instituto is a restorative learning community high school based in the neighborhood of Little Village, where I'm from and I still reside. This was a particularly important group visit because I had also been following the work that the students have been doing at the Chicago History Museum. It's also important to me to have youth from where I grew up visiting a library like the Newberry, something I didn't find out about until I was in college. So lastly, I also create, in the work I do at the library, research guides on materials I think need more visibility. I translate guides and websites pages into Spanish for better access. I suggest materials we can post on social media, purchase for our collections, or add to our bookstore inventory. The image on the far right is a fairly new acquisition. So here are just a couple of screenshots of things that I've translated within the Newberry. And then these are a couple possible new acquisitions, things I've recommended. For instance, I think Nicole's work in particular with the mastheads of the Latino newspapers is something that would be extremely important to have in our collection, especially because a lot of these newspapers are defunct and no longer around. And finally, since I love information and sharing it, I also keep up a website, which I think I included in resources for the panel, that focuses, and I call the decolonial reading list, which a lot of these topics that I kind of really just touched the surface on, I put into my blog every month and I update. But I think it's a good resource if anyone wants to know more about the topics covered. And also I always recommend, if you have any questions, I love being super helpful. So feel free to reach out to me at any time. Okay, that's it.
Thank you, Analú. If I can ask you, would you put a link to that reading list in the chat, please?
Yeah, definitely.
That would be awesome. And thank you to all of our panelists. So now we have time for some Q&A. So I would like to turn things over to Janine and Elia, who've been managing our chat, to see if anything's come up. And just a reminder to everyone, you are welcome to use that asterisk to self-identify if you want to in the chat. So.
As we're waiting for those to come in, Hinda was wondering if Nicole would say a little bit more about the Chicago Raza Research Consortium.
Oh, sure. Can y'all hear me? I'd be glad to say a couple of words, but the idea of it is, well, I'm an enormous fan of the Black Metropolis Research Consortium, and yeah, that's what I was sort of responding to, and that, and the fact that, well, you're actually here in the archive with me right now. There's just so much material. As soon as people heard the word archive and associated with me, people started to hand me things. Like I'd be someplace walking down the street, somebody hands me a bag. I get home, I'm like, oh, what are these cassette tapes, And so I've started to accumulate things, and it doesn't make sense to me to have things that people don't have access to. So whenever I can, whenever it fits Instagram's format, or if it actually fits Facebook's format, I actually have one there too that I can just post things. The problem is all of you who hire social media managers, you should know, yeah, it's a lot of work. It's hard to keep up with it on top of, full-time teaching schedule and parenting and all the other things. But yeah, that's where I sort of just, as I find things that are interesting, I just try to get them out so that other people can access them. And actually have the hope of someday having a space in my house that isn't full of children, that I can invite people to actually look at materials whenever they want to. If that answers your question.
Thanks, Nicole.
Thanks.
Thank you, Nicole. So it looks like things are pretty quiet on the question front. We still have a little bit more time, but while we're waiting to see if any more crop up, I just wanted to throw these in the mix. These are a couple of resources that were created by our panelists that are relevant to the topics that we've discussed today. So at the top there, you can see the hashtag #ArchiveSoWhite blog post that Analú mentioned from 60 inches from center. I believe somebody put a link to 60 inches from center in the chat as well. And then we have 2 articles written by Dr. Seif related to the work that she's done with our other panelists. So for what it's worth.
All right, we have a few more questions that have come in.
Excellent.
This one is for Diana and the other panelists. Donating a life's work or even a portion of it to an archive is a vulnerable act. How do you convince women or people of marginalized communities that their work is valuable and worth archiving?
Let me unmute. Okay, I'm sorry. I think that one of the things that, first of all, I think that we have to convince artists to take a really good look at their work and see how they really feel about it and what they feel would be of tremendous resource to others. For me in particular, it's always been my desire to have my work to be available for educational purposes, primarily for that. So for a long time, even before I put the work away or it was stored away, that's always had been my thought. But a lot of things always get in the way. So I think that the other thing is to continue to share what we are doing with our work to the larger community and invite artists to open forums or to discussions to talk about why it's important to have our work archived and why it would also be important to work with other either homegrown archivists and institutions, and what kind of incidents we might have, and hoping that we could have a good partnership, hoping to have a partnership with different institutions. First, we have to have our voices heard and our concerns heard, and also how we feel about our work in order for our work that we feel safely, that our work can be safe in an archive. Does that help?
Yeah, I just wanted to say also sort of to piggyback off what you said, that not only would it be preserved and safe, but that it would be accessible. And by accessible, right, I mean, it wouldn't be disappeared into, a massive library that would be impossible, that would make it impossible to find later, right? We know, especially as Latinx people, right, that some of whom identify by a national origin, some identify as indigenous, right? There's a lot of different ways that libraries are categorizing things, and I like to describe it as disappearing materials, when it takes like a third archivist to actually find the newspaper that I looked at yesterday or something. Like there's something wrong with the way that it's organized, and that's really like a huge point of stress for me, because then when somebody comes to me and says, hey, I got this thing, like I'm a ceramic sculptor with kids, like I shouldn't have it in my house, so where should it be, right? And then maybe like what I do is make an archive, but I don't want to sort of reproduce things that aren't working in formal archives. So that's the question. And in the case of Diana's work, I think like maybe just crying in front of her about how important the work was to me, and how it's like, these are things I've only read about that people have told me there was no documentation of, or are you kidding me? This happened, and just being so completely transformed by the work, I think was what I did to convince her that it's important.
Kind of going off that a little bit, or unless you had something to say, Analú.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that as well, that I think like the work that both of y'all are doing, I'm a huge fan of course. And I think it, for instance, like when we hosted the Instituto youth here in the Newberry, I found it really important to be able to find stuff that reflected also, right, their experiences and where, like the neighborhood, right, where they're coming from, Little Village, which is the same area I grew up and still live in. So you know, just because I'm familiar with the collections here, I was able to find photographs, historical photographs within the Chicago Reader collection that we had that I think was some of their favorite stuff that they saw. And I'm like, oh, I wish we could get more photographs like this, right? That was that would represent basically our neighborhoods. And I think like when Nicole first showed me and Diana first showed me like the photographs that you take, Diana, I'm like, man, this is the sort of stuff that is really needed, right? So when students like that or other individuals come visit, they can have access and see it, right? And, you know, speaking to what you touched base on too, I think it being publicly accessible is really important because, you know, it kills me when one, you can't find the material, and then two, you can't access it, right? And it's a whole complex issue within subject headings, which is I also have a gripe about too, but I'll stop there.
Can I say something real quick? I just want to say that one of the main things for me was to also, because I wanted to go to educational purposes, I wanted to also have accessibility to community and youth, and not just in an archive where only academics might see it, or, you know, special researchers. So that is something that, you know, I am investigating, and or we are, and looking into as to where it may be ultimately housed, right? So that it can have a better accessibility to the people and to marginalized communities.
Yeah, and again, last comment on this, but it's all part of this, it's part of this like much longer issue, which has to do with like Latinx Chicago history, right? Like there's been tremendous work done on Los Angeles and South Texas, where I'm from, right? But what is crucial about sort of the work that we're doing together, me with the others on this panel, is working with people who are from here. I'm not from here, and it's real dicey when I'm getting into these, you know, interpretation and sharing. Like for me, taking it directly to the young people who live here, right? Taking material to Analú and checking, lots of extra labor. I always appreciate you and adore you. Just want to bring it out there. And also the emotional labor of looking through your entire real life, right, Diana? It's not your work, not separate from you, but like your documentary photography that's also like for, you know, for newspapers, but for your artwork, but also just documenting your life and your travels to all of these, you know, things I've only read about, I've never seen pictures of, incredible things throughout all of the Americas, feminist and lesbian organizing meetings, is really what you're, I mean, the labor that it is for you, I can't even imagine. But I know that we can wear you out in 1 hour talking about it, but I'm just so grateful too, because like nothing that I'm doing would hold any, I mean, it's not substantial as I'm doing it. I feel as if I'm like a facilitator and also a cheerleader, right? Which I'm doing right now because I know how much work this is. And I wish that there was a way to sort of hold this in a singular place so we can all see it for what it is, because we do a lot of this stuff on weekends and at night and via text message.
Yeah, I think your work definitely is, you know, is right up there in terms of like what you do, in terms of your artwork, in terms of your research. I think we need like 100 Nicole Marroquins, you know, to sweep
Working on it.
To sweep across many different parts of the United States. Chicago has some documentation of Latino Mexican Chicago and history, and there are a few books out there, a few researchers, mostly dealing with right after the revolution, the late early 19th century and the 1960s, and then a lot of things stopped from there. Again, I think that people like myself, there are others that we have yet to find or convince that if we can look at their work and have their work out there, And it takes resources, it takes money, it's an incredible amount of hours. And like Nicole said, you know, a lot of this work is done between Hinda, Nicole, and I through emails, text messages, weekends, evenings, you know, regardless of our personal lives and family lives, right? We have families. So this is what we're doing now today, and we will probably continue to do until, you know, we can say that, or we can have a place that where these works are genuinely looked at and respected.
Thank you so much, Deanna. I think that's a good note for us to kind of wrap things up on. This is such valuable work, and I really thank all of my panelists for sharing your expertise. And hopefully the folks who joined us today, thank you all for attending this session. Hopefully you're inspired to take what you've heard today and maybe think about how it applies to the work that you do in whatever institution you're working at. Before we leave things today though, I did want to mention this, which is that if you enjoyed this session and would like to hear more or have some ideas about other topics you would like discussed like this, Janine Kunst is going to be chair of the programming committee for the Women and Gender Studies section's conference session next year, and she would love to hear some feedback from you guys about topics that you would like discussed. So if you wouldn't mind clicking on this link, let's see if I can put that in the can someone put that in the chat for us so that people can click on that? That would be something that would be really helpful. And then last but not least, thank you to all my colleagues in ACRL Arts and to the Women and Gender Studies section for great work in putting this whole session together. So any last minute things from any of my panelists or co-collaborators? All right then. Thanks again. And just a reminder, the recording of this session will be shared with everybody who registered for this session. So if you came in late or you just want to review what we've seen today, you'll get a link to that after this sometime in the near future. So thanks again, everyone.
Thank you.